8-year-old Maya Chen was different from other kids her age, but not in the way you might think. She wasn't loud or demanding attention. Actually, she was the opposite. Maya was the kind of child who could sit quietly for hours, lost in her own world, while chaos happened all around her. In her third-grade classroom at Lincoln Elementary School, Maya had a spot right at the back near the window. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had learned not to call on her too often, not because Maya didn't know the answers, but because the little girl always seemed to be somewhere else entirely. While 24 other children wrestled with their multiplication tables, making faces and counting on their fingers, Maya's eyes would glaze over. Her fingers would start moving on the desk, tapping out patterns that made no sense to anyone watching. Mrs. Patterson thought Maya was just a daydreamer, the kind of kid who needed to focus more, but if anyone had paid closer attention, they would have noticed something strange. Maya's finger movements weren't random. They followed complicated rhythms, patterns that repeated and built on themselves. Sometimes her left hand would tap one rhythm while her right hand tapped something completely different. It was like watching someone play an invisible piano. The truth was, Maya's mind was always full of music. She heard melodies everywhere. The hum of the school's old heater wasn't just noise to her. It was a low C, steady and warm. The squeaky wheel on the janitor's cart played a high F sharp every third rotation. Even the sound of pencils scratching on paper created a kind of rhythm she could follow and build upon. At home, things weren't much different. Maya lived with her parents in a small apartment above their restaurant in downtown Seattle. The place smelled like ginger and soy sauce all the time. Her father, David Chen, spent 14 hours a day in the kitchen cooking orders of fried rice and kung pao chicken. Her mother, Lisa, worked the front counter, taking orders and managing deliveries with a phone pressed between her ear and shoulder. They were good parents who loved their daughter deeply, but they were tired. Running a small restaurant in a big city meant every day was a battle to keep the doors open. There was no money for extras, no piano lessons, no expensive instruments. The family didn't even own a radio that worked properly. The one they had picked up from a garage sale crackled with static more than it played actual music. Maya had never touched a real piano in her entire life. She'd seen them on television sometimes, when her parents let her watch educational programs on the old TV in their living room. She remembered feeling something strange in her chest when she saw those black and white keys. It was like recognizing someone you'd never met before but somehow knew your entire life. Her parents had no idea about any of this. How could they? Maya never talked about the music in her head. She didn't know it was unusual. She assumed everyone heard the world the way she did, full of notes and rhythms and harmonies waiting to be discovered. In school, Maya had a few friends, but not many. Other kids thought she was weird. During recess, while everyone else played soccer or tag, Maya would sit under the big oak tree in the corner of the playground. She'd close her eyes and listen to the sounds around her. Children laughing in groups of 3 created a different rhythm than children laughing in groups of 5. The swing set squeaked in B-flat. The basketball hitting the pavement made a satisfying thump that she could build entire songs around in her imagination. Her only real friend was a boy named Tommy, who sat next to her in class. Tommy didn't mind that Maya was quiet. He'd talk enough for both of them, telling her about his dog and his older brother and the video games he played on weekends. Maya would listen and nod, her fingers still tapping on the desk, and Tommy never once asked her why she did that. He just accepted it as part of who she was. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned to Maya's parents during conferences that their daughter seemed distracted. "She's a sweet girl," the teacher had said, flipping through papers on her desk. "Her grades are fine, not excellent, but fine. I just worry she's not engaged. Maybe she needs more activities outside of school." David and Lisa had looked at each other with tired eyes. More activities meant more money, more time, things they simply didn't have. They'd nodded politely and promised to work with Maya at home, knowing full well that most nights they barely had energy to help her with homework before collapsing into bed. But Maya didn't mind. She didn't feel like she was missing anything. Her world was already full of something most people never experienced. Every morning when she woke up, she'd lie in bed for a few minutes and listen to the city coming alive outside her window. The garbage truck rumbling past at 6 in the morning, the coffee shop next door grinding beans, the footsteps of early morning joggers on the sidewalk. All of it was music to her. She'd tried once to explain it to her mother. "Mama, do you hear the singing?" she'd asked one morning while eating breakfast before school. Her mother, rushing to get the restaurant ready for the lunch crowd, had barely heard her. "What's singing, baby? Eat your cereal, we need to go." Maya had nodded and gone back to her bowl the moment lost. That's how Maya's life went, day after day, week after week. She existed in two worlds at once. The regular world that everyone else lived in, where you did your homework and brushed your teeth and went to bed on time, and another world, a secret world made entirely of sound and rhythm and melodies that no one else could hear. A world where her fingers knew exactly what to do, even though they'd never done it before. Nobody knew that this quiet, distracted little girl sitting in the back of a third-grade classroom carried something extraordinary inside her. Something that would soon explode into the world and change everything. Not just for Maya and her tired, hardworking parents, but for everyone who believed they understood what human potential really meant. For now, though Maya was just another kid in just another classroom in just another city, tapping her fingers on her desk, lost in a world of music that only she could hear, waiting, without even knowing she was waiting, for the moment when that invisible music would finally become real. The field trip announcement came on a Tuesday morning, and most of the kids in Mrs. Patterson's class erupted with excitement. They were going to the Seattle Symphony Hall, one of the most famous concert venues in the entire Pacific Northwest. For 8-year-olds who'd never been anywhere more exciting than the Science Museum, this felt like a huge deal. Maya sat quietly at her desk while her classmates buzzed with energy around her. She'd heard of symphony halls before, but had never really thought much about them. Tommy, sitting next to her, was practically bouncing in his seat. "My dad says they have a piano there that costs more than our house," he whispered to her. "Can you imagine? A piano worth more than a whole house." Maya felt something flutter in her chest at the word piano. She didn't respond to Tommy, just nodded slightly, but her fingers had already started their familiar tapping on the desk. Only this time the rhythm was faster, more urgent, like her body knew something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. The day of the field trip arrived 2 weeks later. Maya wore her best clothes, which weren't much. A clean pair of jeans and a purple sweater her mother had bought on sale. Her parents had packed her a lunch in a brown paper bag with her name written on it in her mother's careful handwriting. David had wanted to take the morning off from the restaurant to come along as a chaperone, but they'd needed him in the kitchen. Instead, he'd hugged Maya extra tight that morning and told her to have fun. The bus ride to the Symphony Hall took 30 minutes. Maya pressed her face against the window, watching the city roll by. The other kids sang songs and played hand-clapping games, but Maya just watched and listened. She was good at listening. When they finally arrived and filed off the bus, Maya looked up at the building and felt her breath catch in her throat. The Seattle Symphony Hall was beautiful in a way she'd never seen before. It had tall columns and big glass doors and stone, steps that seemed to go on forever. Mrs. Patterson had to call her name twice to get her to stop staring and follow the group. The inside was even more amazing. The ceiling soared high above them and everything echoed. Their footsteps, their voices, even the sound of backpacks shifting on shoulders. It all bounced around the space, creating layers of sound that made Maya's heart beat faster. This was a place built for music. She could feel it in her bones. Their tour guide was a cheerful woman named Jennifer, who wore a bright red dress and spoke with a lot of enthusiasm. She led them through hallways lined with photographs of famous musicians. She showed them the different sections where orchestra members sat. She explained how sound traveled through the carefully designed space. The other kids listened politely, but most of them were getting restless, ready for lunch. Then they entered the main concert hall, and Maya stopped breathing for a moment. The room was enormous, with rows and rows of red velvet seats rising up in tiers. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. And there, on the stage, bathed in a single spotlight even though no performance was scheduled, sat a grand piano. It was the most beautiful thing Maya had ever seen. The wood was so black it looked almost blue under the lights. The keys seemed to glow white, impossibly clean and perfect. The curve of the instrument reminded her of something alive, like a sleeping animal that might wake up at any moment. Jennifer was talking about the piano now, and Maya tried to focus on her words. "This particular instrument is a Steinway Model D concert grand," Jennifer said, gesturing toward it with obvious pride. "It's valued at over $200,000 and has been played by some of the world's greatest pianists." The other kids gasped and whispered to each other. $200,000. For one instrument. It seemed impossible. Tommy grabbed Maya's arm. "See, I told you. More than a house. But Maya wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about the sound that piano must make. She was thinking about all those keys. 88 of them she'd learned from a book once, each one connected to a string inside that would vibrate and sing when you pressed it. She was thinking about how her fingers would know exactly where to go, even though she'd never touched a piano before in her entire life. The group started moving again, heading toward the orchestra pit. But Maya's feet wouldn't move. She stood there, staring at the piano, feeling a pull so strong it was almost painful. It was like the instrument was calling to her, speaking in a language only she understood. Maya, honey, we need to keep moving, Mrs. Patterson called from the front of the group. Maya nodded but took one step closer to the stage instead of following her class. Then another step. Then another. She wasn't thinking about rules or permission or the fact that she was supposed to stay with her group. She was thinking about that piano and how her entire life had been leading to this moment, even though she'd never known it until right now. Her hand reached out toward the stage, toward those gleaming keys that seemed to be waiting just for her. She was close enough now that she could see her own reflection in the polished wood, close enough to smell something she'd never smelled before, like old wood and metal and something else she couldn't identify. The smell of music, maybe. The smell of possibility. "Hey there, young lady," a voice said gently, and Maya jumped. She turned to find a security guard standing a few feet away. He was an older man with kind eyes and gray hair, wearing a dark blue uniform. Maya's heart sank. She was going to get in trouble. She'd broken the rules, but the security guard wasn't frowning. He was smiling. "You really love pianos, huh?" he asked, walking closer to stand beside her. Maya didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. "Do you play?" he asked. Maya shook her head. She'd never played. Never even touched a real piano. But somehow she knew she could. She couldn't explain how, but she knew. The security guard looked at her for a long moment. There was something in her face and her eyes that made him pause. He'd worked at the Symphony Hall for 15 years and had seen thousands of children come through on field trips. Most of them were loud and uninterested, but this little girl was different. She looked at that piano the way someone might look at a long-lost friend. He glanced around. The rest of Maya's class had moved on to another part of the building. The concert hall was empty except for the two of them. The guard made a decision that would change everything, though he didn't know it at the time. "Tell you what," he said quietly, leaning down so only Maya could hear. "I'm not supposed to do this, but you seem like a good kid. How about you touch just one key? Just one. What's the harm in that, right?" Maya's eyes went wide. She looked at him, then at the piano, then back at him, making sure he was serious. He nodded toward the instrument. "Go ahead. Just one note. Our secret." Maya didn't need to be told twice. She climbed up onto the stage, her shoes making soft sounds on the polished wood. She walked to the piano like she was approaching something sacred, and maybe it was. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out toward the keys. She chose one near the middle. She didn't know why that one. It just felt right. Her finger pressed down and the note rang out through the empty concert hall. It was clear and pure and perfect. Middle C, though Maya didn't know the name for it yet. She just knew it was right. It was home. The sound filled the hall, echoing off the walls and ceiling, wrapping around Maya like a hug. And in that moment, something inside her woke up. Something that had been sleeping her entire life suddenly opened its eyes. That single note wasn't just a sound. It was a key that unlocked a door Maya hadn't known existed. Behind that door was everything she'd been hearing in her head her whole life. But now it could be real. Now it could exist outside of just her imagination. Tears filled her eyes, though she didn't understand why. She looked down at the piano keys, all 88 of them stretching out in both directions from where her finger rested. Somehow she knew that her fingers could find any note on this piano, that they could play anything she heard in her head, that this instrument was what she'd been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. The security guard watched her face and felt a chill run down his spine. He'd seen something in that moment, something he couldn't explain. The way that little girl had looked at the piano, the way her whole body had relaxed when the note sounded, like she'd been holding her breath for 8 years and could finally exhale. "Okay, kiddo, that's enough," he said gently. Maya nodded and pulled her hand back slowly, reluctantly. She climbed down from the stage and turned to the guard. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was so soft he almost didn't hear it. "Thank you so much." She ran off to find her class then, leaving the security guard standing there in the empty concert hall, wondering what had just happened. He didn't know that he'd just witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary. That one single note had started a chain of events that would amaze the world. All he knew was that something had just happened. Something important. Something he'd remember for the rest of his life. The security guard couldn't get that little girl out of his mind. 3 days after the field trip, he was still thinking about her. About the way she'd looked at that piano. About the tear that had rolled down her cheek when she pressed that single key. He'd worked at the symphony hall long enough to know that wasn't normal. That was something else entirely. His name was Robert, and he'd been a musician himself once, back in his 20s. Nothing famous, just a guy who played guitar in local bars and dreamed of making it big. Life had other plans, but he still understood what it meant to love music deeply. And that little girl, she had something in her eyes that he recognized. A hunger, a need that went beyond just liking music. So Robert did something he'd never done before. He went to the symphony's music director, Richard Morrison, and told him about Maya. Morrison was a busy man, always rushing between meetings and rehearsals, but he respected Robert. They'd worked together for over a decade, and Morrison had learned to pay attention when Robert spoke. There was something about this kid. "Richard?" Robert said, leaning against the doorframe of Morrison's office. "I can't explain it, but I've seen thousands of children come through here, and none of them looked at that piano the way she did." Morrison listened, intrigued despite himself. He dealt with talented children all the time. Parents were always trying to get his attention, claiming their kid was special, was gifted, was the next big thing. Usually they weren't. Usually they were just normal kids whose parents pushed too hard. But Robert wasn't a pushy parent. He was just a guy who'd seen something unusual and wanted to share it. "Did you get her name?" Morrison asked. Robert nodded and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. He'd called the elementary school and asked about the field trip. The secretary had been helpful, giving him the contact information for the teacher, who'd then given him the parents' phone number. Maya Chen, 8 years old. Parents owned a Chinese restaurant downtown. Morrison stared at the paper for a long moment. He had a packed schedule, concerts to prepare for, musicians to coordinate, 100 different responsibilities pulling him in 100 different directions. But something about Robert's story had gotten under his skin. A kid who cried from touching a single piano key. That was worth a few minutes of his time. He called the number that evening. Maya's mother answered, confused and a little suspicious. People didn't usually call asking about her daughter. Morrison explained who he was and what Robert had told him. He kept his voice casual, friendly, not wanting to scare the family. He just wanted to meet Maya, to see for himself if Robert's instincts were right. Lisa Chen was overwhelmed. The music director of the Seattle Symphony wanted to meet her daughter? It seemed impossible, unreal. But Morrison's voice was kind, and he promised it would only take an hour. No pressure, no commitment, just curiosity. Finally, Lisa agreed. They set up a meeting for the following Tuesday, after the symphony hall closed to the public. Maya didn't fully understand what was happening when her parents told her. She just knew she was going back to see the piano again, and that was enough to make her unable to sleep the night before. She lay in her small bed staring at the ceiling, her fingers tapping out rhythms on her blanket. Tuesday evening arrived. The restaurant was unusually busy, so David had to stay behind. Lisa closed up early and took Maya on the bus to the symphony hall. Maya pressed her face against the window the entire ride, watching the city lights blur past, her heart beating fast with anticipation. Morrison met them at the entrance, and Robert was there too, smiling at Maya like they were old friends. Morrison was a tall man with gray hair and glasses that made him look distinguished. He shook Lisa's hand and then bent down to Maya's level. "Hi, Maya. Robert told me you really liked our piano. Is that true?" Maya nodded, too nervous to speak. Morrison smiled. "Well, how would you like to try it again? For real this time?" Maya's eyes went wide, and she looked at her mother for permission. Lisa, feeling completely out of her depth, nodded. They walked through the empty building, their footsteps echoing in the quiet halls. The concert hall was dark except for the stage, where that same spotlight illuminated the grand piano. It looked even more beautiful than Maya remembered, like it had been waiting for her to come back. Morrison led her up to the stage and pulled out the bench. Maya climbed up, her legs swinging above the floor because she was still too short. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She could feel her mother watching from the front row, could feel Morrison and Robert standing nearby. But most of all, she could feel the piano, alive and waiting beneath her fingertips. "Do you know any songs?" Morrison asked gently. Maya shook her head. She'd never had lessons, never owned sheet music, never been taught a single thing about how to play piano. Morrison found that fascinating. "Okay, how about this? I'm going to play something simple and you try to copy it. Just for fun. No pressure." He sat down at a second piano they rolled onto the stage. He played a simple scale, C major, 8 notes going up, 8 notes coming back down. It was the first thing most piano students learned. Basic, foundational, easy. Maya listened carefully, her head tilted slightly to one side. When Morrison finished, she turned to her own piano. Her hands moved to the keys and she played the scale back to him. Perfectly, not a single mistake. The same rhythm, the same touch, like she'd been playing scales her entire life. Morrison's eyebrows went up. "That was good. Really good. Let's try something a bit harder." He played a simple melody, something a first-year student might learn. Maya listened and then played it back note for note. Morrison felt a tingle of excitement in his chest. "Okay, now we're getting interesting." For the next 15 minutes, Morrison played increasingly difficult pieces, watching as Maya absorbed each one and played it back flawlessly. She never asked him to repeat anything. She never looked at sheet music because there wasn't any. She just listened and played. Her fingers seemed to know where to go automatically, like they'd been doing this for years. Lisa sat in the audience, her hand covering her mouth, tears starting to stream down her face. She'd had no idea at all that her quiet, distracted daughter could do this. How was this possible? Maya had never touched a piano before that field trip. How could she play like this? Morrison was thinking the same thing. This wasn't normal musical talent. This was something else. Something he'd read about but never actually witnessed. Perfect pitch, maybe, combined with some kind of photographic memory for sound. But even that didn't fully explain what he was seeing. This child wasn't just copying notes. She was understanding the music, feeling it, making it her own even while replicating it perfectly. Then Morrison decided to do something he hadn't planned. Something that would test Maya in a way that would reveal just how extraordinary she really was. He turned to his piano and began to play a piece he'd composed himself 5 years ago. A piece he'd never published, never performed publicly, never recorded. A piece he'd written during a difficult time in his life, pouring all his frustration and sadness and hope into the notes. It was technically demanding. Complex chord progressions that required large hands and years of practice. Tempo changes that could trip up even experienced pianists. Emotional dynamics that took maturity to understand. He'd never performed it publicly because he couldn't play it perfectly himself. There were sections where his fingers stumbled, where the reaches were just a bit too far, where the speed was just a bit too much. But he played it now for this 8-year-old girl, wanting to see what she would do. Wanting to know if Robert's instincts had been right, if this child really was as special as she seemed. Maya listened with an intensity that was almost frightening. Her whole body was still, but her eyes tracked Morrison's hands. She absorbed every note, every pause, every subtle shift in emotion. The piece lasted about 4 minutes. When Morrison finished, his hands were actually tired. It was a workout to play something so demanding. He turned to Maya, expecting to see confusion. Maybe she'd try to play bits and pieces. Maybe she'd ask him to play it again. Maybe she'd give up entirely. He wouldn't blame her. Professional pianists couldn't play this piece after hearing it once. Maya sat very still for a moment, her hands resting in her lap. She was processing what she'd heard, sorting through the layers of sound, organizing it in her mind in a way that made sense to her. Then she looked up at Morrison and spoke for the first time that evening. Her voice was quiet but clear. "That was beautiful. The sad part in the middle made me think of rain." Morrison felt goosebumps rise on his arms. The middle section was meant to evoke exactly that. A storm, emotional and musical. He'd never told anyone that. "Thank you, Maya, that's exactly right." Then Maya turned to her piano. She placed her hands on the keys and she began to play. She played Morrison's composition, the one she'd heard exactly once, the one that had taken him months to write and years to almost master. She played it from beginning to end without a single mistake. Her small hands stretched across the keys in ways that should have been impossible for someone her size. Her fingers flew through the rapid sections with ease. The slow parts carried an emotional weight that gave Morrison chills. Morrison couldn't sleep that night. He watched the video of Maya playing his composition over and over on his phone, still unable to fully believe what he'd witnessed. He'd been in the music world for 40 years. He'd worked with prodigies before, children who showed remarkable talent at young ages. But this was different. This was something beyond anything he'd ever seen or even heard about. The next morning he made a decision. He called Maya's parents and asked for permission to share the video. He wanted to post it on social media, to show other musicians what this child could do. David and Lisa talked it over for hours. They were simple people who kept to themselves. The idea of putting their daughter on the internet made them uncomfortable, but they also understood that what Maya could do was special, and maybe the world needed to see it. They agreed with conditions. No personal information, no address or school name, just the video and a simple explanation. Morrison promised to protect the family's privacy. That afternoon, he posted the video on several social media platforms with a caption that read, "8-year-old child with no musical training plays complex composition after hearing it once. I wrote this piece. I can barely play it myself. She heard it one time and played it perfectly. I don't have words for what I witnessed today." For the first few hours, nothing much happened. The video got a few dozen views, mostly from Morrison's colleagues and friends in the classical music world. They left polite comments, impressed but not overwhelmed. Then someone with a larger following shared it. Then someone else. Then someone else. By midnight, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. Morrison woke up the next morning to his phone exploding with notifications. The video had been shared thousands of times overnight. It had jumped from the classical music community to the wider world. Parents, teachers, musicians, and people who'd never listened to classical music in their lives were watching this little girl play piano and losing their minds. The comment section became chaos. Some people were amazed, calling Maya a miracle, a genius, a gift to the world. Others were skeptical, claiming the video had to be fake. Some said Morrison must have trained her and was lying about her having no experience. Others suggested the audio was recorded separately and dubbed over the video. Conspiracy theories sprouted like weeds. Professional musicians weighed in and they were split. Some verified that what Maya did should be impossible. One famous pianist commented, "I've been playing for 30 years and I couldn't do what this child just did. Either this is the greatest hoax of the decade, or we're watching something that will rewrite what we think we know about musical ability." By day 3, the video had 10 million views. News outlets started reaching out. Entertainment shows wanted interviews. Morning programs invited the family to appear. Music magazines requested exclusive stories. Maya's parents' phone rang constantly. David and Lisa were terrified and overwhelmed, hiding in their apartment above the restaurant while the world outside went crazy. Morrison tried his best to shield them from the chaos, but it was impossible. The story was too big, too viral. Within a week, the video had been viewed over 30 million times. It had been shared in dozens of languages. It had spawned reaction videos, analysis videos, and countless debates about whether it was real. The skeptics were loud. "Show us her playing something else," they demanded. "Show us multiple angles. Bring in experts to verify this isn't fake." The pressure mounted. Morrison realized they needed to do something to prove the video was legitimate, or the controversy would overshadow Maya's actual gift. Meanwhile, Maya's life had become completely surreal. Her parents kept her home from school because reporters had figured out which elementary school she attended and were waiting outside with cameras. The restaurant's business exploded because people wanted to meet the family of the piano girl. But David and Lisa had to hire their nephew to help manage the crowds because they were spending all their time dealing with phone calls and protecting their daughter's privacy. Maya herself didn't understand what all the fuss was about. She watched parts of the video on her mother's phone and shrugged. "That's just me playing piano," she said simply. She didn't grasp that what she could do was extraordinary. She thought everyone could do it if they just listened carefully enough. She asked her parents when she could go back to the symphony hall and play the piano again. That's all she cared about. Not the fame or the attention or the millions of people watching her video, just the music. Prestigious music academies started reaching out. Juilliard sent a letter expressing interest in Maya for their pre-college program, even though she was younger than they typically accepted. Curtis Institute of Music offered a full scholarship. The Royal Academy of Music in London called from England. Schools from Germany, Japan, Russia, and France all wanted to assess Maya's abilities and potentially bring her into their programs. Record labels reached out with contract offers. Concert promoters talked about booking tours. Talent agents wanted to represent her. People who'd never met Maya were making plans for her future, seeing dollar signs and opportunities. David and Lisa felt like they were drowning. They were just restaurant owners. They didn't know anything about the music industry or how to navigate this insane new world they'd been thrown into. Morrison became their unofficial advisor, helping them sort through the legitimate offers and the scams. And there were plenty of scams. People claiming they could make Maya a star for just a small upfront fee. Companies wanting to use her image to sell pianos or music lessons or apps. Everyone wanted a piece of this 8-year-old girl who could do the impossible. Through it all, Maya remained remarkably calm. She didn't get excited about the attention or the offers. She didn't read the comments or watch the reaction videos. Her parents tried to keep her as isolated from the chaos as possible. What Maya cared about was the piano. Morrison had arranged for a donated keyboard to be delivered to their apartment, and Maya spent every free moment at it, teaching herself songs she heard on the radio, playing melodies that came from her own imagination. The keyboard wasn't a real piano, and Maya could tell the difference. The keys felt wrong. The sound was electronic and flat, but it was better than nothing, and she was grateful for it. She'd sit at that keyboard for hours, her fingers dancing across the keys, lost in her own world of sound while chaos swirled around her. About 2 weeks after the video was posted, a journalist from a major news network managed to get through to David and Lisa with an interesting proposal. They wanted to do a legitimate test of Maya's abilities, bring in music experts, film it from multiple angles, let Maya prove to the world that her gift was real. They'd do it professionally, respectfully, with the family's input on everything. Morrison thought it was a good idea. The doubters aren't going away, he told David and Lisa over dinner at their restaurant one evening. And honestly, even I want to see if Maya can do this again. What if that first time was a fluke? What if she can only do it with certain types of music? We need to understand what we're dealing with here. David was protective. She's just a child. She shouldn't have to prove anything to anyone. But Lisa saw the bigger picture. If we don't do this, people will always wonder, always question. Maybe it's better to show them once and for all so they can leave us alone. They asked Maya what she thought. She was sitting at her keyboard playing something soft and pretty, something she'd made up herself. She stopped and looked at her parents with her serious dark eyes. "Will there be a real piano?" she asked. Morrison nodded. "A beautiful one of the best in the world." Maya thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I want to play a real piano again." And so it was arranged. The news network would set up a controlled demonstration at the Symphony Hall. Music professors from the university would be there to witness it. A professional piano tuner would verify the instrument hadn't been tampered with. Multiple cameras would capture every angle. Maya would be asked to replicate pieces she'd never heard before, played by professional musicians who would deliberately choose difficult compositions. The date was set for 3 weeks away. In the meantime, the video continued to spread. More and more people watched the original clip. The view count climbed to 50 million, then 75 million, then past 100 million. Maya Chen, the 8-year-old girl from Seattle who'd never had a music lesson in her life, had become one of the most watched people on the internet. But none of that mattered to Maya. She just wanted to play piano. She'd sit at her little keyboard in her little apartment above her parents' restaurant, playing songs that existed only in her head, waiting for the day when she could sit at a real piano again, waiting to show the world that what she could do wasn't a trick or a fake or a fluke. It was just her. It was just who she was. And it was beautiful. The news demonstration went exactly as Morrison had hoped. Maya performed flawlessly, replicating complex pieces after single hearings while experts watched in stunned silence. The skeptics had no choice but to accept that her gift was real. But that demonstration opened another door that no one had anticipated. The organizers of the Young Musicians of America competition had been watching. The competition was legendary in classical music circles. It had been running for 62 years and had launched the careers of dozens of world-famous musicians. Every year, hundreds of young musicians between the ages of 13 and 18 competed for scholarships. recording contracts, and the prestige of being crowned Young Musician of the Year. Winners went on to perform at Carnegie Hall, study with the greatest teachers in the world, and build careers that lasted decades. 3 days after Maya's demonstration aired, Morrison received a phone call that made his heart race. The competition's executive director, Helen Park, wanted to extend a special invitation to Maya. They'd never invited someone so young before. Their rules specifically stated competitors had to be at least 13. But Maya's abilities were so extraordinary that the board had voted unanimously to make an exception. Morrison immediately saw both the opportunity and the danger. This could be amazing for Maya, giving her a platform to share her gift with the world's most serious classical music community. But it could also be a disaster. The competition was intense, pressure-filled, and not designed for 8-year-olds. And there would be backlash. He knew that much for certain. He was right about the backlash. The moment the competition announced Maya's special invitation, controversy erupted. Music teachers whose students had trained for years wrote angry letters. They said it was unfair, that it made a mockery of the discipline required to compete at that level. How dare the organizers let in some untrained child just because she'd gone viral on social media? What about the students who dedicated their childhoods to music, practicing 4 or 5 hours a day, working with expensive instructors, preparing for years? Online forums for classical music fans lit up with heated debates. Some defended the decision, arguing that genius should be recognized regardless of age. Others called it a publicity stunt. Parents of teenage competitors were especially angry, feeling that their children were being disrespected. Why should their kids, who'd sacrificed so much, have to compete against someone who'd never even had a lesson? The 3 competition judges found themselves at the center of the storm. They were all highly respected concert pianists with international reputations. Judge Elena Volkov, the most famous of the 3, was known for being tough, demanding, and absolutely uncompromising in her standards. When reporters asked her opinion on Maya's invitation, she'd responded coldly, "If this child is truly as gifted as the videos suggest, then she'll have no problem proving it on stage. If not, this will be a very short competition for her." David and Lisa Chen were terrified. The competition would take place in Chicago in just 6 weeks. Maya would have to perform in front of a live audience of over 2,000 people, plus the judges, plus cameras that would broadcast the event online. She'd be competing against teenagers who'd been training their entire lives. And she was 8 years old with 0 formal training. "We should say no," David told Morrison over the phone. "This is too much pressure for a little girl." But Morrison believed in Maya. "I think she can handle it. I really do." But ultimately, it's her decision. They asked Maya what she wanted to do. She was sitting at her keyboard as usual, playing something gentle and complicated at the same time. She stopped and thought about the question carefully. "Will I get to play a real piano?" she asked. "Yes," Morrison said. "One of the best pianos in America." Maya nodded decisively. "Then I want to do it." The next 6 weeks were surreal. Morrison worked with Maya a few times a week, not teaching her how to play exactly, but helping her understand musical terminology and basic concepts. Maya absorbed everything instantly. Concepts that took most students months to grasp, she understood in minutes. She couldn't read sheet music, but she didn't need to. She only needed to hear something once. Meanwhile, the media circus around the competition intensified. Entertainment news programs covered it like a sporting event. Betting websites actually started taking odds on who would win. Maya was both the favorite and the most controversial choice. Think pieces appeared in major newspapers debating whether it was appropriate to put a child in such a high-pressure situation. Child psychologists weighed in. Music educators wrote op-eds. Everyone had an opinion. The other competitors and their teachers were furious. 17-year-old Christine Wu had been training for this competition for 3 years with one of the best piano instructors in California. She'd won multiple regional competitions. She'd sacrificed her social life, her free time, everything to prepare. And now she had to compete against some viral video kid who'd probably been coached and marketed, but couldn't possibly have real skill. It felt like an insult. 14-year-old James Peterson from Boston felt the same way. He'd been accepted to a summer program at a prestigious music academy. He practiced 6 hours a day. He'd performed in dozens of recitals. He'd earned his place at this competition through years of hard work. The idea that an 8-year-old with no training could just walk in and compete against him seemed ridiculous and offensive. The competition organizers stood by their decision, but privately, some of them were nervous. What if Maya froze on stage? What if the pressure was too much? What if she couldn't actually perform under these conditions and the whole thing became a disaster? They'd be blamed for exploiting a child, for turning serious music into a circus. The stakes felt impossibly high. The day finally arrived. The Chen family flew to Chicago, and Morrison came with them as Maya's guardian for the competition. They stayed in a hotel near the venue, and Maya was more excited about the airplane ride than the competition itself. She'd never flown before. She'd pressed her face against the window the entire flight, watching the clouds pass by, tapping rhythms on the armrest. The preliminary round was held in a beautiful concert hall in downtown Chicago. Backstage, Maya waited with the other young competitors. The contrast was striking and uncomfortable. The other kids wore formal concert attire that had clearly been chosen specifically for this event. The girls wore elegant black dresses or gowns. The boys wore suits with bow ties. They carried leather portfolios with sheet music. They traveled with their instructors who gave them last-minute advice and encouragement. Maya wore a simple navy blue dress her mother had bought from a department store the week before. It was pretty but nothing special. She had no sheet music because she didn't need any. She had no instructor giving her advice. She just had her parents and Morrison, who all looked as nervous as everyone else felt. Maya was the only one who seemed calm, sitting quietly in a chair, her legs swinging above the floor, humming softly to herself. The other competitors and their teachers stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Some whispered to each other, not even trying to hide their disapproval. "That's her? That's the famous viral girl? She looks so young. This is embarrassing for everyone involved. I heard she can't even read music. How is she supposed to compete?" Christine Wu's teacher, an elegant older woman named Barbara, made a point of walking past Maya and looking her up and down with obvious judgment. She leaned down to whisper to Christine loud enough for others to hear, "Don't worry about her, darling. This isn't about social media likes. This is about real musicianship. Just play your best and let your training speak for itself." Maya heard the comment but didn't react. She'd learned over the past few weeks that a lot of people didn't believe in her, didn't want her here, thought she was a joke. It didn't bother her much. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. She was here to play piano. That's all that mattered. Out in the concert hall, the audience was buzzing with anticipation. The place was packed. Every seat filled. People who'd never attended a classical music competition in their lives had bought tickets just to see if Maya Chen was real, or if the whole thing had been an elaborate hoax. Music critics from major publications sat in the press section, ready to write scathing reviews if this turned into the circus they expected. Television cameras lined the back wall, broadcasting the event live online where millions more people were watching. The three judges sat at a table in front of the stage. Elena Volkov sat in the middle, her face stern and unsmiling. The other two judges, both accomplished pianists in their own right, looked more nervous than critical. They knew the eyes of the entire classical music world were on them. This competition would either validate the traditional path to musical excellence or suggest that training and discipline mattered less than raw natural ability. Either outcome would be controversial. The preliminary round began. One by one, young musicians took the stage and performed pieces they'd prepared for months. The level of talent was extraordinary. These weren't just good student musicians. These were the best young classical musicians in America, maybe in the world. They played with technical precision, emotional depth, and years of training evident in every note. Maya had chosen to play a piece by Debussy that Morrison had played for her the week before. It was called Clair de Lune, and Maya loved it because it sounded like moonlight would sound if moonlight could sing. She played it beautifully, her small hands moving across the keys with confidence and grace. The audience listened in respectful silence, and when she finished, they applauded politely. It was a good performance, solid. Impressive for an 8-year-old, but it wasn't extraordinary. Not compared to what the older competitors had done. The truth was, Maya had just played one piece, competently but without the depth that came from years of understanding music theory and performance practice. The other competitors had played with nuance and interpretation that came from maturity and training. Maya had played accurately, but that wasn't enough to win a competition at this level. The judges conferred quietly among themselves. Elena Volkov looked unimpressed, which didn't surprise anyone who knew her reputation. The other two judges seemed more sympathetic but not overwhelmed. The preliminary round was supposed to narrow the field from 20 competitors to 8, who would move forward. Based on what they'd just seen, Maya would likely not make the cut. She was good, but she wasn't in the same league as the older trained musicians. But then Elena Volkov did something unexpected. She stood up from the judges' table and walked toward the stage. The audience murmured in confusion. This wasn't part of the normal protocol. Judges didn't approach competitors during performances. They stayed at their table, took notes, and made their decisions privately. But Volkov had a reputation for being unpredictable, for testing musicians in ways they didn't expect. She climbed the stairs to the stage, and Maya watched her approach with wide eyes. Volkov was an imposing figure, tall and elegant with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was stern, with deep lines that suggested a lifetime of demanding perfection from herself and others. She'd been performing professionally for 40 years and teaching for 20. She'd trained dozens of successful concert pianists. She knew music in ways most people couldn't even comprehend. "Maya Chen," Volkov said, her accent thick with Russian roots. "I've watched your videos." "Everyone has watched your videos. They say you can hear a piece once and play it perfectly. Is this true?" Her tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. It was the tone of someone who'd seen too many supposedly gifted children fail under real pressure. Maya nodded, unsure what else to do. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. The microphone on the piano picked up her voice, broadcasting it through the concert hall. She sounded even younger than her 8 years, nervous and small. "I see," Volkov said. She walked to the second piano on stage, the one that had been moved there for demonstrations. "Then I would like to test this ability, if you don't mind, with something you've never heard before." The audience buzzed with excitement. This was getting interesting. This was the kind of moment people had bought tickets for. The other two judges looked at each other uncertainly. This wasn't standard procedure. But they didn't stop Volkov. She was the senior judge, the most respected, and she had a right to assess competitors however she saw fit. If she wanted to test Maya's viral video claims, that was her prerogative. Volkov sat at the second piano and opened a thick book of sheet music she'd brought from the judge's table. She flipped through it, her fingers running down the pages, searching for something specific. Finally, she found what she was looking for. "Rachmaninoff," she announced to the audience. "Piano Concerto No. 3, third movement, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire." Backstage, the other competitors watched on monitors, and several of them gasped. Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto was legendary for its difficulty. Most professional pianists avoided it because it was so challenging. The third movement in particular required enormous hands, incredible speed, and perfect control. It had broken the spirits of countless advanced students, and Volkov was going to play it for an 8-year-old with no training? "I will demonstrate a section," Volkov said, looking at Maya. "You will attempt to replicate it. We will see if your gift is real or if it's just clever editing and coaching." There was challenge in her voice now. She was tired of viral sensations, tired of social media creating false idols. If this child was truly gifted, she would prove it now under pressure in front of thousands of witnesses. Volkov turned to the piano and began to play. The piece started with a cascade of notes that sounded like water rushing over rocks. Her fingers moved so fast they almost blurred. The music was powerful and intense, demanding everything from the performer. But about 30 seconds in, Volkov's fingers stumbled. There was a section with rapid chord progressions, big stretches that her hands had to make quickly, and she missed one. Then another. She pushed through, but the mistakes were obvious to everyone listening. She stopped, frustrated with herself. Her jaw was tight. This was one of the sections that had always given her trouble, even after decades of playing. The reaches were just slightly too far for her hands. The speed was just a touch faster than she could execute perfectly. She'd performed this piece in concert before, but never flawlessly, never the way it was meant to be played, you see, she said, turning to Maya with a bitter smile. "Even I cannot play this perfectly. I have been playing piano for 55 years. I have performed in every major concert hall in the world. And this passage defeats me." She gestured toward the piano. Now you try if you think you can. The challenge hung in the air. The audience held its breath. This was it. This was the moment where Maya would either prove she was everything the videos claimed, or reveal herself as just another child who'd been overhyped by the internet. The pressure was crushing. This wasn't just about playing a difficult piece. This was about validation, about legitimacy, about whether natural gift could truly surpass a lifetime of training. Maya sat very still for a moment. She'd listened carefully to what Volkov played, absorbing every note, every rhythm, every shift in tempo. In her mind, she could see the music like a map. She understood where Volkov had struggled and why. The stretches were big, yes, but Maya's hands were small and flexible in ways adult hands weren't. What seemed impossible for Volkov might actually be easier for her. She looked up at the stern Russian judge and spoke softly but clearly. "May I try?" The microphone caught her voice, broadcast it through the hall. She sounded so young, so innocent, asking permission to attempt something that master pianists found impossible. Volkov gestured toward the piano, with an expression that might have been respect or might have been skepticism. "By all means, child. Show me what you can do." Maya turned to her piano. She didn't have the sheet music. She didn't need it. She placed her hands on the keys and she began to play. She started from the beginning of the section Volkov had demonstrated, but she didn't stop where Volkov had stopped. She kept going, playing with a confidence and precision that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Her small hands stretched across the keys, making those impossible reaches look easy. Her fingers flew through the rapid passages without a single mistake. Where Volkov had stumbled, Maya sailed through. The music poured out of the piano like it had been waiting inside the instrument all along, just needing the right person to release it. The audience forgot to breathe. Backstage, competitors watched with their mouths hanging open. Christine Wu felt something crack inside her chest. 3 years of training, 3 years of 4-hour practice sessions, and this 8-year-old was playing Rachmaninoff like it was a simple children's song. How was this possible? But Maya wasn't finished. When she reached the end of the section Volkov had played, she didn't stop. She kept going, playing more of the third movement even though she'd never heard it before. Somehow the pattern had made sense to her. The structure had revealed itself in that brief demonstration. She understood the language of the piece and she was speaking it fluently. She played for 2 full minutes, navigating sections that would take most students years to master. Her interpretation was raw and young in some ways, lacking the polish that came with maturity. But technically it was flawless. Every note was crystal clear. Every rhythm was precise. Every dynamic was intentional. When she finally stopped, the silence in the concert hall was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. They'd just witnessed something that shouldn't be possible, something that violated everything they understood about how musical skill developed. Elena Volkov stood very still at her piano, staring at Maya with an expression that was hard to read. Her face had gone pale. Her hands, those famous hands that had played in the greatest concert halls in the world, were trembling slightly. For the first time in decades, Elena Volkov felt small. She felt humbled. She felt like she'd just seen something that changed everything she thought she knew about music. Slowly, she walked over to Maya's piano. The little girl looked up at her nervously, unsure if she'd done something wrong. Volkov knelt down so they were eye level. And then, to everyone's shock, tears began rolling down the famous judge's cheeks. Elena Volkov, known for being cold and demanding and impossible to impress, was crying. The standing ovation went on for 5 full minutes. People weren't just clapping politely. They were cheering, whistling, shouting Maya's name. Some people in the audience were holding up their phones, recording this moment, knowing they were witnessing something historic. This wasn't just a good performance. This was a moment that would be talked about for decades. The day an 8-year-old girl walked onto a stage in Chicago and played music that seasoned professionals couldn't play. Elena Volkov eventually raised her hand for silence. The crowd slowly quieted down, but the energy in the room remained electric. Everyone was on the edge of their seats, wondering what would happen next. Volkov looked at Maya, who sat at the piano looking confused and a bit overwhelmed by all the attention. The judge's stern expression had softened into something almost maternal. "Maya," Volkov said, her voice carrying through the hall, "what you just demonstrated was remarkable. But I wonder if you truly understand what you played. You played a fragment of a larger piece. The third movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 continues for several more minutes. You played perhaps 1/10 of it. Do you know the rest? Maya shook her head. No, ma'am. I only heard what you played. The honesty in her voice was striking. She wasn't trying to brag or impress anyone. She was just stating a fact. Volkov nodded slowly, thinking. Then she made a decision that would create another viral moment. Another piece of history. I have the full score here. I'm going to play the entire third movement for you, Maya. All of it. And then I want to see if you can play it back. Is that acceptable to you? The other judges looked at Volkov in surprise. This was highly irregular. This wasn't part of the competition format, but they didn't object. They were as curious as everyone else to see what would happen. The audience murmured excitedly. They were going to witness another test, another impossible challenge. Morrison, watching from backstage with David and Lisa, felt his heart pounding. This was a lot to ask of Maya. The third movement was over 6 minutes long, incredibly complex, full of technical challenges that would trip up even advanced students. Could Maya really hear it once and play it back? Or would this be the moment where her gift reached its limit? But Maya didn't look worried. She looked excited. She nodded at Volkov. Okay, I want to hear it. Her enthusiasm was genuine. She loved hearing new music. It didn't matter if it was complex or difficult. Music was music, and she wanted to experience it. Volkov returned to the second piano. She took a moment to prepare herself, stretching her fingers, rolling her shoulders. Then she began to play. The full third movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 poured out of the instrument. It was powerful and demanding, full of dramatic shifts in tempo and mood. There were sections that sounded like storms, sections that sounded like prayers, sections that sounded like pure joy. Volkov played for 6.5 minutes, and despite the stumble she'd had earlier, she performed beautifully. Not perfectly. There were still a few rough patches, but with passion and skill that reminded everyone why she was considered one of the great pianists of her generation. When she finished, she was breathing hard, her forehead damp with perspiration. Playing Rachmaninoff was a physical workout as much as a mental one. She looked at Maya, who'd sat perfectly still the entire time, absorbing every single note. Well, child, do you think you can play it? Volkov's tone wasn't mocking. It was genuinely curious. She wanted to know the limits of this gift, wanted to understand what she was seeing. Maya didn't answer with words. She simply turned to her piano, placed her hands on the keys, and began. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across the internet. It would be analyzed by music professors, studied by cognitive scientists, and debated by anyone who thought they understood human potential. Maya played the entire third movement from memory, all 6.5 minutes of it. She didn't miss a note. She didn't hesitate. She didn't stumble in the places where Volkov had stumbled. Her small hands navigated the keyboard with impossible precision, making reaches that seemed too big, executing runs that seemed too fast, managing dynamics that seemed too mature for someone her age. But more than just technical accuracy, Maya brought something else to the performance, something that shocked even Volkov. She added her own interpretation, small changes in dynamics that Volkov hadn't made, but that somehow made the music more emotional, tiny pauses in unexpected places that added dramatic weight, subtle variations in tempo that gave certain phrases more impact. It was still Rachmaninoff. It was still faithful to the composition. But Maya had made it her own in a way that was breathtaking. She'd heard it once and not only memorized it perfectly but understood it deeply enough to improve upon Volkov's interpretation. That shouldn't be possible. That went beyond photographic memory or perfect pitch. That was artistry. The audience watched in complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. They were witnessing something that might never happen again, a moment of pure, inexplicable genius. When Maya finished, she lifted her hands from the keys and looked up at Volkov as if asking, "Was that right?" Her innocence in that moment was heartbreaking. She had no idea what she'd just accomplished. She had no concept of how extraordinary she was. For a long moment, nobody reacted. The silence stretched on, heavy and profound. Then Elena Volkov stood up from her piano. She walked slowly to center stage, stood in front of the audience, and began to applaud. Not the polite applause of before. This was deep, resonant clapping that echoed through the hall. Tears were streaming down her face again, but she didn't care who saw. The other two judges stood immediately and joined her. Then the audience erupted. If the previous standing ovation had been enthusiastic, this one was overwhelming. People were screaming. People were sobbing. Complete strangers were hugging each other. Music critics who'd come prepared to write skeptical reviews were wiping tears from their eyes, their notebooks forgotten. Backstage, the other competitors watched in stunned silence. Christine Wu was crying, but they weren't tears of anger anymore. They were tears of awe. She'd just watched something that changed her understanding of what music could be. James Peterson sat with his head in his hands, not out of jealousy, but out of pure emotional overload. He'd dedicated his life to music, and he'd just seen what music could be when it was channeled through someone truly extraordinary. Their teachers stood behind them, equally moved. Barbara, Christine's instructor who'd been so dismissive of Maya earlier, had her hand over her mouth, tears running down her cheeks. "I was wrong," she whispered. "God help me, I was so wrong about that child." David and Lisa Chen were holding each other, crying and laughing at the same time. Their daughter, their quiet, strange little girl who tapped rhythms on restaurant tables, had just moved thousands of people to tears. Had just done something that would be remembered for generations. They didn't fully understand how or why, but they understood that their lives would never be the same. Morrison stood apart, watching through a camera monitor, and he felt something he'd rarely felt in his 40 years in music. He felt grateful. Grateful to have been there for Maya's first time touching a piano. Grateful to have been the one to recognize her gift. Grateful to be witnessing this moment. This was why he'd dedicated his life to music. For moments like this, when something transcendent happened and reminded everyone why art mattered. On stage, Elena Volkov walked over to Maya and knelt down again. She took the little girl's face gently in her hands. "Maya Chen, you are a miracle.
Do you understand me?
You are something that comes along maybe once in 100 years, maybe once in 1,000 years. I have been playing piano since I was 4 years old. I have studied with the greatest teachers. I have performed on the greatest stages. And in 8 years of life with no training, you have surpassed what took me a lifetime to achieve." Maya looked at her with those big, serious eyes. "But you played it first. I just copied what you did." The simplicity of her statement made Volkov laugh through her tears. "No, child. You didn't copy. You transformed. You made it better. You made it yours." Volkov stood and addressed the audience, her voice strong despite the emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have been a judge for this competition for 12 years. In that time, I have seen extraordinary talent. I have seen young people who went on to have distinguished careers. But I have never seen anything like what I witnessed today. This child has redefined what I thought was possible. She has humbled me. She has reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." She turned to the other judges. "I don't think we need to deliberate on this one, do we?" They both shook their heads, smiling. The senior judge stood and spoke into his microphone. "Maya Chen advances to the final round. Unanimously." The audience cheered even louder. But advancing to the finals was almost beside the point now. Maya had already won something far more important than a competition. She'd won the hearts of everyone who'd witnessed this performance. She'd proven that her gift was real, undeniable, and profound. The rest of the preliminary round felt like an afterthought. The remaining competitors performed well, but everyone's mind was still on what Maya had done. 6 months after the competition, Maya's life had transformed in ways that seemed impossible to imagine. The small apartment above the restaurant was gone. David and Lisa had closed the restaurant, not because they wanted to, but because they needed to focus entirely on protecting and supporting their daughter through this overwhelming new reality. A trust fund had been established by several anonymous donors who'd been moved by Maya's story and wanted to ensure she'd have financial security to develop her gift without pressure. The amount was substantial enough that the Chen family would never have to worry about money again. David had cried when the lawyers explained it to them. He'd spent his whole life working 14-hour days just to survive, and suddenly that burden was lifted. They'd moved to a modest house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood with a music room. The room had large windows that let in natural light, and in the center sat a beautiful grand piano, donated by a piano company that wanted to be associated with Maya's story. It wasn't as expensive as the one at the Symphony Hall, but it was a real piano, and Maya spent hours at it every day. But the biggest change was Elena Volkov. The famous Russian pianist had shocked the classical music world by announcing she was taking an indefinite sabbatical from performing to work with Maya. She'd been offered millions of dollars to continue her concert career, had venues booked years in advance, had recordings scheduled with major labels, but she'd walked away from all of it. "I've been performing for 40 years, she'd told a reporter who'd asked why she'd make such a dramatic decision. "I've played in every major concert hall. I've recorded dozens of albums. I've won every award there is to win. But working with Maya, helping to nurture this gift, this is the most important thing I could possibly do with whatever time I have left. Some opportunities only come once in a lifetime. This is mine." Volkov had moved to Seattle and essentially became part of the Chen family. She came to their house 4 times a week, but her sessions with Maya were unlike any traditional piano lessons. They didn't drill scales for hours. They didn't work through exercise books. Instead, Volkov would play pieces for Maya, and they'd discuss the music together. They'd talk about the composers' lives, about the historical context, about what the music was trying to express. Maya absorbed everything instantly, as always. But more importantly, she was learning to think deeply about music, not just play it. Volkov was teaching her the why behind the notes, the emotions and stories and human experiences that made music meaningful. And surprisingly, Volkov found herself learning from Maya too. The child heard music in ways Volkov never had. Maya would point out patterns and connections that Volkov had never noticed in pieces she'd been playing for decades. She'd suggest interpretations that were unconventional, but somehow perfect. The relationship became less like teacher and student and more like 2 musicians exploring music together, despite the 50-year age difference. The media attention had been overwhelming at first. For weeks after the competition, reporters camped outside their house. News vans lined the street. People wanted interviews, documentaries, exclusive access. David and Lisa, with Morrison's help, had to hire a manager to handle all the requests. They turned down most of them, protective of Maya's privacy and childhood, but they couldn't shield her completely. Maya gave a few carefully controlled interviews where she came across as exactly what she was. A sweet, slightly shy child who happened to be able to do extraordinary things with a piano. She didn't understand why people made such a big deal about it. When one interviewer asked her what it felt like to be called a genius, Maya had thought about it seriously and then said, "I don't know. I just really like piano." "Don't other people like things too?" The comment had gone viral and people loved her even more for her innocence and humility. Fan clubs formed online. Musicians from around the world sent her messages of support. Young piano students who'd watched her videos found new inspiration to practice. Maya had become more than just a prodigy. She'd become a symbol of human potential, of what was possible when pure talent met genuine passion. Concert offers poured in from around the world. Carnegie Hall wanted her to perform. The Royal Albert Hall in London sent an invitation. Symphony orchestras in Paris, Tokyo, Berlin, and Sydney all requested that she play with them. The fees being offered were enormous, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single performance. Money that could secure her future forever. But David and Lisa, guided by Volkov and Morrison, turned almost all of them down. Maya was still only 8 years old.
She needed to be a child.
She needed time to develop not just as a musician, but as a person. They agreed to 2 performances per year, carefully selected venues where Maya genuinely wanted to play. Everything else could wait. The performances they did accept became major events. When Maya played at Seattle's Symphony Hall 6 months after the competition, every ticket sold out in 47 seconds. The audience included not just classical music fans, but people who'd never attended a symphony before. They came to witness something special, and Maya didn't disappoint. She played a program that mixed classical masterpieces with her own improvisations, and the audience was spellbound. At school, things were complicated. Maya had returned to Lincoln Elementary after the competition, hoping for some normalcy. But normal was impossible now. Other kids treated her differently. Some were in awe of her, too intimidated to be normal friends. Others resented her, thinking she was showing off or getting special treatment. Teachers didn't know how to handle having someone famous in their classroom. Tommy, her old friend, was one of the few who still treated her the same way. He'd watched all her videos and thought they were cool. But mostly he just wanted to tell her about his dog and share his snacks at lunch. Maya appreciated that more than he could know. She wanted to be normal Maya, at least sometimes. But eventually David and Lisa made the difficult decision to homeschool her. It wasn't what they wanted. They believed in the socialization of regular school. But Maya was too recognizable now, too much of a distraction. A tutor came to their house each morning to teach her regular subjects, and Maya proved to be a quick learner in everything, not just music. Her mind worked fast, making connections and absorbing information in ways that reminded her teachers of her musical ability. Afternoons were for music, for practice, for lessons with Volkov, for exploration and creativity. Maya had started composing her own pieces, and they were remarkably sophisticated for someone her age. Volkov encouraged this, believing that Maya's true destiny might not just be performing other people's music, but creating her own. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after the competition, Maya sat at her piano in the music room, working through a new piece Volkov had introduced her to that morning. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting golden light across the keys. Her fingers moved confidently, bringing the music to life. Volkov sat in a chair nearby, watching with a cup of tea in her hands. She'd been reflecting a lot lately on what Maya represented, what her existence meant for music and for human potential. For decades, Volkov had believed that mastery came through discipline, through thousands of hours of deliberate practice, through suffering and sacrifice and pushing through barriers. She'd built her entire philosophy on that foundation. But Maya challenged all of that. Maya proved that sometimes genius just existed, fully formed, needing only the right opportunity to reveal itself. It wasn't about hard work versus talent. It was about accepting that human potential was far more diverse and mysterious than anyone understood. When Maya finished the piece, she turned to Volkov with a question in her eyes. "Elena, why do you think I can do this? Why me and not other people?" Volkov had been asked this question by countless reporters and researchers. She'd given them various answers about brain structure and auditory processing and genetic gifts. But with Maya alone in this room, she gave a different answer. The truth as she understood it, I don't know, little one. I truly don't know. Maybe you were born with certain abilities that others don't have. Maybe there's something unique about how your brain is wired. Or maybe, she paused, choosing her words carefully, maybe you're what happens when a pure love of music exists in a mind that has no barriers, no doubts, no fear. Maybe you can do what you do because you've never learned that it should be impossible. Maya thought about this seriously, as she thought about everything. Will I lose it someday? Will I forget how to play? The fear in her voice was real. Music was who she was. The thought of losing it was terrifying. Volkov set down her tea and moved to sit next to Maya on the piano bench. She put her arm around the small girl's shoulders. I cannot promise you what the future holds. None of us can. But I can tell you this. What you have is not a trick or a phase. It's part of who you fundamentally are. Your gift might change as you grow, might evolve into something different, but it won't disappear. Music is in your bones, child. It always will be. Maya leaned against Volkov, comforted by her presence. Over the past 6 months, the stern Russian judge had become like a grandmother to her. Strict but loving, demanding but protective, someone who understood Maya in ways even her parents couldn't, because Volkov lived in the world of music too.